Listen up, all fight fans and fitness junkies. You've been listening to me talk about Jocko Fuel for a while now, and if you've been waiting, the wait is over. This August, you can score a massive 30% off on all of Jocko Fuel's top-tier supplements. That's right, 30% off. Jocko Fuel is loaded with all of the good stuff and none of the bad. We're talking no added sugar, no artificial sweeteners, and absolutely no gray area or banned substances. Just pure, clean fuel to power your performances. And guys, I really want you to try some of my favorites like Jocko Go and Jocko Hydrate. This deal is only going to be available for the month of August. So use code Chael30 or go to JockoFuel.com. Don't wait. Fuel up with Jocko Fuel and crush your goals. Guys, click on the link below to make it happen. Paddy the Baddy is going to fight Dan Hooker. Now, let's observe this from both fighters' point of view, okay? We were wrong over here at Bad Guy Inc. about Paddy the Baddy at the very beginning of his UFC career. It turns out he's not what we thought. It turns out he's much more skilled. He's much more dedicated. He has much more courage. He's a much smarter person than we had originally known. The whole world believed this on Paddy. I'm just admitting that we had it wrong. But the whole world thought like this was a spoof. This was a joke. This guy says really funny things. He's pretty fun to watch. He's got pretty good power upstairs. He do some pretty cool stuff if he gets down on the mat. He's a regional guy, which means there's going to be a part of the world, there's a region where you could use him, you could sell some local tickets, you could have some fun, he'll spice up your press conference, 3, 4, 5 fights into it, he'll be long gone, but he'll have had those memories and everybody enjoyed it along the way. None of those things turned out to be true. It turns out he's very dedicated, he's very good. There is nothing I have seen from Paddy the Baddy yet that eliminates the possibility that he goes on to be a title holder. Nothing. There's no way, you get him tired. Or, he can't protect himself, and then you fill in the blanks. Well, he's awfully weak if he's got a southpaw stand for... No, we have not seen it yet. We have not seen a glaring weakness. We have seen improvement. We have seen Paddy out there on nights where he shouldn't have done well. One, when he's dealing with grief, the loss of life of a loved one. We get informed of how difficult it is for him to make weight the day before, but he does it and never once complains or looks tired or sluggish. A knee injury, of which sidelined him for a little over 11 months. I mean, all of these things are going to, at a minimum, make you not perform great. He looked better each time. Now, Paddy the Baddy is 2 fights away from fighting for the World Championship, and not in that they could just make the fight. If he's 2 fights away and they got to be the right fights. But from we, the community, demanding and acknowledging he go next for the title. So what do those 2 fights have to be? And that's where Paddy the Baddy fighting Dan Hooker. Step number 1 is that. Step number 1, who is somebody that he can go move around with that moves him closer to the ranking? Dan Hooker is ranked number 5 in the world. Great. Now, if I was to give you an X's and O's of that fight, it would be a little bit hard. Like, I don't suggest for you that, Paddy's just got this style that does really well with Dan. Paddy has weaponized pace. I watched Paddy win a fight that he was losing the first round purely by getting his opponent tired. Dan Hooker is a master of pace. There's a couple of reasons, though. And Dan Hooker has really learned, as a veteran of the sport, where to use his energy. Dan Hooker has learned as a veteran of the sport that 3 rounds isn't a very big ask of a guy, particularly for a guy that's done and signed up for, on multiple occasions, 5 rounds. So who would outpace and who would outpush who? I think we're starting to see that there's a number of categories where they're pretty level. Now, it's going to be blasphemy if you say that Paddy the Baddy can beat Dan Hooker. And Paddy the Baddy is so well loved that wherever he goes, he's got a base that will say those very words. But Dan Hooker's got that same base, and he is just as loved, and I don't think you're going to have a lot of people that can say that with a straight face. Like, who's going to win that fight is fully between those 2 guys. Now, let's look at it from Dan Hooker's perspective, because what good is coming of that? Dan Hooker has been in there with the world champions. The 4 guys that are ranked in front of him, these are 4 of the great names in the history of our sport, and he's in the same company with them. Meanwhile, Paddy the Baddy is on the back end. He broke into a ranking, overperformed. He was an underdog in the fight. He overperformed, gets his opponent, King Green, out of there, gets him out of there quickly. So I think if Paddy was looking at that, I think that he would have to give it a real good look to Dan Hooker. The question becomes, why would Dan Hooker want to go and fight him? And I'm just here to share with you. When Dan Hooker says he will fight anybody, he really does mean that. Just find me an opponent. He's meant that and had to cannibalize his body to go down to 145 pounds. He, on multiple occasions, is willing to go up to 170 pounds. Like, there's a lot of guys that say, I'll fight anybody. But it comes with a caveat. They didn't actually mean anybody. They assumed you weren't going to bring me a guy that was 7 down in the rankings, or somebody that is so hot and so polarizing of a personality. That in and of itself puts a pressure on some of the veteran fighters, but I don't think it would make Dan wink a bit. I think Dan Hooker would look at that purely as a big fight. I don't think he'd go any further. I don't think he would look at what the rankings are. I don't think he would look at, does it move me closer to a championship? I don't think he would go, what does it do for my legacy? I don't think he would do any of those things. I think he would look at that and go, that's a big fight. People like Paddy, people like me, where are you thinking of doing it? Are we doing it a little closer to Australia? Are we doing it a little closer to England? We meet somewhere like America? Like, I just see where you could get guys to agree to the match. Because matchmaking isn't as simple as sometimes you think as a fan. Well, if I could do it, I just put this guy with this guy. It's like, well, you're not wrong, but how are you going to do it? And then there's interworkings that you might not know about. The last guy in a guy's contract, not renegotiating on the side. This guy just did a new 5-fight deal. This guy, I mean, there's things and there's moving parts that you don't understand. And as much as you would like to get guys together, the ability to actually get them together, this is where it becomes a job. This is where it becomes a career in an industry. This is where those relationships come in, and not just anybody could slide into that role. And I just share for you. I mean, I submit this possibly as my biggest piece of evidence. Dan Hooker would fight Paddy the Baddy. Paddy the Baddy would fight Dan Hooker. Paddy the Baddy did an interview where he talked about fighting Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker has not yet seen that interview, but when he does, he's going to have something to say about it. And that response is coming any minute now.